Almost 50 years ago, we gained our independence off the British Empire after the Revolutionary War, and ever since, we have been growing into a power to be reckoned with. With the resources of the New World at our disposal, and a steady stream of immigrants to take advantage of our strengths, these United States of America can easily become the dominant power of the New World. And with the Spanish Empire recently collapsing after the Napoleonic Wars, it has opened the door for new allies in South and Central America. We are the shining jewel and the beacon of democracy, and we will continue to be this beacon for decades to come. By 1837, after our most recent federal elections, the Democrats and the slavers of the South are in power, pushing even harder for slavery to be entrenched in our democracy, which has triggered overwhelming violence in Kansas on whether it should be a slave or free state. And after the violence reached its peak, the federal government intervened. And because the territory is above the Mason-Dixon line, and with evidence arriving that the slavers started the violence, Kansas will become a free state. However, this has not stopped the radicals from causing overwhelming problems. But for right now, status quo has been maintained. So we are under no pressure to act. Instead, we will focus on the development of factories in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, and begin drawing up plans for expansion of plantations in Virginia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. By 1847, in the background of our industrial expansion and our attempts to maintain the status quo, the Indian removal has been underway. This operation, fueled by our westward expansion, has been to remove the Native Americans from their land and relocate them to the Indian Territory in Oklahoma. Many people are saying that these people do not deserve rights and should be forcefully evicted. Despite the ideas of the current administration, thousands of dollars will be given to the families and tribes being forcefully relocated to assist them on their journey. And now with the South and much of the North being native free, our settlers are able to freely expand. However, just like with the slaves in the South, many people are saying that the Native Americans should have equal rights. And specifically for the natives, they should have their own nation within the United States of America. However, the administration has shut down all of these. Even though they gave money to the natives, it was reluctantly. And with their slaving and white supremacist tendencies, they have refused these requests outright. Though these people are a minority, they are slowly rallying against the status quo. But whether this will change anything is up in the air. For now, we will officially welcome 5 new states into the Union and continue our westward expansion. By 1848, the situation internationally has become somewhat dire. In 1823, we signed the Monroe Doctrine, announcing to the world that we will not tolerate any new European colonies in the New World. Now we have nations violating this announcement. France is going after Haiti, trying to reestablish their own colony in the region, and Nicaragua has been forcefully brought into the British sphere of influence. Right now, we cannot resist the Europeans, but this has shown us that if we want to enforce the Monroe Doctrine and keep the nations of the Americas free, we will have to use military force. And so, we will immediately begin the expansion of the United States Army and Marine Corps, so that we may be able to resist the Europeans, as it is unlikely they will stop here. A long time later, in 1854, the situation within these United States of America has become dire. Multiple slaves managed to cross the border into Mexico, where slavery is illegal. and the current administration sent troops across the United States to control the slave population and prevent another incident like this from happening. However, this has had the opposite effect. Many more slaves have fled north, and after the Whig Party managed to barely win the recent midterms, the Confederate States of America have broken off from the Union and declared independence. And so, the newly formed Republican Party formed a new government, and we are now in an open civil war. Good news is we were able to expand the army ever since the Europeans began violating the Monroe Doctrine, and we were able to concentrate most of them in the north, which means we have an army almost 3 times the size of the Confederates. And with the South not having the industrial might of the North, we are confident that we will be able to not only crush the Confederate States of America, but also liberate the millions of enslaved people and correct the most grave injustice that our nation has taken part in. By 1856, the slavers and their evil ways have been defeated, with the Union prevailing in the American Civil War. And because of that, the Republican Party has been given a mandate to work towards a greater America. We will begin reincorporating and reconstructing the southern states, while also sending the army to work towards freeing the millions of slaves in the South. And will also, as further reparations towards the Native Americans, give the Indian Territory the state of Kansas, so that they will have more space for all the forcefully removed natives to establish themselves and begin new lives. Next, we must begin political reforms. While the Democratic Party was in power for many decades, the nation has barely progressed. But now, we will try to move the nation forward. We will begin by working towards a public health care system. Other reforms, like pensions and poor laws, will be worked towards. But we have no idea how long these reforms may take, and after what will come next. But what we do know is that we will work as hard as we can to bring the United States of America into the modern era. By 1860, the United States of America has come a long way. We are recovering from the Civil War, and Reconstruction is going along swimmingly, despite white supremacist terrorist organizations in the former Confederate States of America attacking people of color and newly freed slaves. Which is why we have sent the army to begin suppressing and eliminating these terrorists. Along with this, we have also begun the slow industrialization of many states, such as Florida, Virginia, and Louisiana. But now, internationally, we have great and terrible news. First, the bad. The French and the British have been putting extreme pressure on Latin American nations, forcing these nations to fall into their spheres of influence. But after the Civil War, we now have the military might to back up the Monroe Doctrine, and so we will effectively formalize it and invite the newly independent state of Quebec and Los Altos into the new power bloc, a bloc that will fight for democracy, for freedom, and the independence of American states. Along with these two new members, we'll begin fighting the French over influence in Guatemala and Honduras, planning to soon flip them to our side, along with all of Central America and Santo Domingo. And eventually, after we can consolidate over Central America, we will begin looking to South America to protect nations like Venezuela, New Granada, and Uruguay from foreign influence. Until then, we'll continue our current domestic agenda of rebuilding the South, along with the construction of railroads that will begin connecting our western territories to the industrial heartlands of America. By 1867, the expansion of the Monroe Doctrine has been going over swimmingly. We have won against the French and British in Central America, and now we are slowly working into South America, where we are battling the French over influence in Venezuela. And we have begun cozying up to New Granada. But for right now, we have a military campaign to go on. Peru, one of our closest allies and the most recent member of the Monroe Doctrine, has entered a bloody civil war. As per the agreement of mutual defense in the Monroe Doctrine, they have called for our assistance, which we must provide. Along with sending over an expeditionary force, we will begin the expansion of the United States Navy so that it may be able to contest the French, Dutch, and Spanish. By 1868, the war in Peru has been won, and now we can retire the Navy and Army until the next military campaign. Until then, we will turn to our own financial recovery. In order to secure Central America from the French and British, we have been forced to invest millions of dollars into these nations to battle the great powers economically, which means we have no more gold in reserve. So for the next little while, we will need to begin to rebuild our stockpiles so that if a major war should ever come to our shores, we will be able to fund it. Until then, we will begin limited economic development by continuing the construction of railroads to connect the new cities popping up in the western United States. On March 4th of 1869, terrible news has arrived. After the Mexican government began evicting thousands of Native Americans from their Oklahoman territory, many crossed the border into the Indian Territory, and Mexican troops followed, raiding and burning many villages. Immediately, they announced a formal apology and provided compensation. But then, the same thing happened in the Colorado Territory. Again, the Mexican government apologized and offered compensation. But a few months later, Mexican naval vessels intentionally target American fishing boats in the Gulf of Mexico. And this time, the Mexican government has offered no formal compensation or apology. Because of this, we have sent them a demand to hand over their Colorado territories. And 1 week later, they have refused all of our demands. Which means we will declare war on Mexico to liberate as much as we can. Colorado, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas will be our primary objectives as we fight for the freedom of the people of North America. By the summer of 1871, the war with Mexico has been won, with all of our newly demanded territories being handed over to us, with New Mexico being released as an autonomous nation just like the Indian Territory. Texas and Colorado will be formally incorporated into the Union, and the Indian Territory will receive American Oklahoma. Turning to the political side of things, our reforms have gone over splendidly, with public health care, poor laws, and now restrictions on child labor being implemented. And with it, we can begin a new expansionistic project. The construction of railroads has gone over swimmingly, and with them, we can now begin to give federal grants to people wanting to start factories and build industry within the new cities. But now, turning back to the international community, the British Empire has declared war on our ally of Guatemala. And so, it is time for our first fight with a European power. By the tail end of 1874, the war with the United Kingdom is over. The British were forced to give up their claims to British Guatemala. In exchange, we had to give up our demands for the Mosquito Kingdom. And in Canada, many revolutions have broken out. We would love to send financial and military aid to these revolutionaries. However, because of the war, we need to focus on paying off our $10 million of debt. So unfortunately, we will not be able to send assistance to our Canadian allies. However, we'll begin slowing down our federal construction efforts at home and instead start moving money to South America so that we may be able to finally win the battle against the French over Venezuela and convince Ecuador to join the bloc. By 1879, we have recovered financially and we are ready to send a delegation to Mexico to negotiate and try to convince them to join the Monroe Doctrine. But before they could even leave Washington, D.C., Mexico declared war. So, regrettably, we will have to try to march to Mexico City again and secure peace and freedom for the Mexican people. By 1883, the war with Mexico has unfortunately not been won, nor was it lost, however. It is clear that the Mexicans have learned from their mistakes during the First Mexican-American War and have modernized their military greatly, resulting in us barely able to push south of the Rio Grande, and so we decided to sign a white peace with the Mexican government. This is highlighted while we have been expanding the Monroe Doctrine peacefully. Excluding our recent war with the British, we have allowed our military to become complacent, which means modernization and expansion is needed. So, we will try to spend the next decade modernizing and expanding the army, introducing modern artillery, cavalry, and infantry tactics. By 1896, we have come farther than expected. The army has been expanded to almost 500 battalions. And nations like Argentina, Venezuela, and Tawana... Okay, pause. Whoever strung these letters together to form this word... future. And we are currently working on exerting influence over Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, and oh my, you are kidding me. Angola Jaga. Why? Just why? But in the middle of these expansions, a new problem has arisen. New Granada. For the last few decades, we have been struggling to convince them economically and politically to join the Monroe Doctrine. And now they have declared war on Venezuela. Because of that, they are requesting our military assistance, which we will oblige. But with even worse news, Brazil has managed to fall to the British Empire, being forced economically into their sphere of influence. We will begin battling the British economically to try and save Brazil, but right now we need to focus on New Granada and their blatant disregard for Venezuelan sovereignty. But thankfully for us, the Grenadans have backed down. But that means our newly mobilized military has nothing to do, which is why we will send them north to Canada. The British are in an active civil war against the syndicalists, which means if we move fast and if we move hard, we will be able to take Canada and Newfoundland and liberate continental North America. On December 25th, 1899, the war has been won. Canada and Newfoundland have been liberated. Quebec has been fully expanded and reunified. And the British are technically off the North American continent. We say technically because they still hold the Caribbean and the Mosquito Kingdom. But in the negotiations, we have figured out a path that will hopefully allow us to not need to go back to war with the British. The Caribbean will be united into a dominion of the British Empire and be given the right to self-governance, just like Cape Colony in what was formerly Canada. And by 1905, the British must leave the Mosquito Kingdom, with the time between now and then being given so the British can prepare the kingdom for independence. And soon we will plan to integrate them into the Monroe Doctrine. And speaking of the Monroe Doctrine, we have managed to bring Chile, Bolivia, and Uruguay into the sphere, which means the only nations left in North America that are not part of the pact are Brazil, Paraguay, New Granada, and Mexico. As mentioned earlier, Brazil is under the grasps of the British Empire, and with our relationship tanking with New Granada and Mexico, the likelihood of integrating the last two nations may be next to impossible, but we'll try as hard as we can to battle the British over the future of Brazil. For now, we must prepare for our next military campaign, which will be to push the French out of the Caribbean. They have a weak fleet and army, which means we will have the potential to liberate Haiti and the French West Indies. We'll take a few years to prepare and then launch the naval expedition with the creation of our new classes of ships. By March 1st of 1905, the situation is becoming slowly catastrophic. We went to war with the French, and though we have secured Haiti and the French West Indies, they are not surrendering. And then Spain has declared war on Honduras. And the British have not been abiding by the treaty and have not given the Mosquito Kingdom independence. Moreover, Canada has given independence to Nova Scotia, resulting in them leaving the Monroe Doctrine. However, it is not all bad news. Mexico has formed their own sphere of influence, meaning we'll no longer need to bring them into the Monroe Doctrine, as they will be able to protect themselves from foreign influence. By September 30th of 1905, the situation is bleak yet positive. We won the war against the French, meaning Haiti is under our control. And in the chaos, Brazil managed to gobble up French Guiana. And at the request of the native people of the French West Indies, Santo Domingo has peacefully annexed the territory. And seeing our victory, the British abided by the treaty and gave independence to the Mosquito Kingdom, which we have already begun work to incorporate them into the Monroe Doctrine. However, we did lose the war against Spain. Despite sending an army to assist Honduras, they refused to let us fight, which meant the front line collapsed, resulting in Spain taking the capital and enforcing the subjugation of the nation. Because of that, we have immediately signed a treaty with rebel organizations with plans for when the truce with Spain is over to march our armies back into Honduras and liberate the country. And we are also renegotiating and integrating Nova Scotia. However, they are starkly independent, and that may take years. Until then, we'll prepare for the inevitable war with Spain. On August 1st, 1914, the war has been won. Honduras has been brought back from the clutches of European totalitarianism, along with the island of Puerto Rico. We were unfortunately unable to liberate Cuba, but we have begun supporting rebels and independence movements on the island, same within the Bahamas and Jamaica. We are still working on reintegrating Nova Scotia, which hopefully will be accomplished by the end of 1920. However, we have abandoned trying to bring New Granada into the Monroe Doctrine, as they are simply too stubborn and too unstable. But luckily for us, Brazil managing to break the chains of the British influence and create their own pact. Almost the entirety of the North and South American continents have been freed from the Europeans. And with our recent wars, we have shown that this new status quo can be enforced. The Monroe Doctrine is one of the greatest successes of the 20th century. We have become one of the most liberal countries on the planet. And now, with our allies, we will protect the Americas together. From Alaska to Chile, Newfoundland to Washington, America and her allies will continue to be the arsenal of democracy that the world needs.